Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a very interesting video where we will be taking a look at the 2024 presidential electoral map and do an election prediction where we put incumbent U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, who is soon to leave office, and soon to be Vice President of the United States Kamala Harris against each other in one of the most likely 2024 election scenarios. So we're going to take a look at the map, take a look at where each candidate would succeed, where each candidate would probably do a little bit worse than their predecessors, in this case, for Mike Pence, President Donald Trump, and for Kamala Harris, President or elect Joe Biden. So we're going to take a look at all of that and talk about where do these candidates have appeal and truly what are the benefits of each party nominating and who would win if the matchup ended up being this on the electoral map. But before we get into all of that, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So let's start by filling in the Democratic safe states for Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. So she is probably going to have a very similar safe state map to Joe Biden, to what he had. I think generally speaking, it's going to look like this, where you're going to have essentially the West Coast, which traditionally votes very Democratic, and her home state, of course, is probably going to carry that by a lot. And California has always gone Democrat, always. I would think in the Southwest, New Mexico at this point in time would be safe. Truly, Mike Pence doesn't have the appeal someone like Trump could have had to make the margin a little bit smaller. Anyways, the Democrats would win here. However, I think Harris could win here by a margin of over 15%. Because remember, a safe margin is a victory of anywhere from 15% or more. Hawaii, again, traditionally Democratic area, the Northeast, and again the state of Illinois, lonely right there in the middle of the country. So that would be essentially what the Democratic safe states will look like. Now, for Mike Pence, he would do very well up here in what you could consider the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest, that general area of the country, very conservative part of the country. I would say that Mike Pence could be more popular in an area like this than President Trump. I know it sounds crazy, but he appeals to that kind of voter. And I think a lot of these states that traditionally would be a lot closer, for example, Iowa, could be a lot, definitely, a lot less big of a difference, or a less big of a swing state, as Vice President Pence has that appeal to the general part of the country. He would be winning places like Indiana and Missouri. Indiana is his home state, keep that in mind. But in areas like Missouri, he would win by a pretty considerable margin. I think some of the notable omissions would be Alaska and the state of South Carolina. These two I'm going to get into when I classify them for the projected winner. Why they're not in the safe margin, because traditionally these states would fall under the safe margins of over 15% for the Republican Party. But I think moving on from here on, it's not going to be that way. So this is the map we start off of with the Republicans at 112 electoral votes and Kamala Harris and the Democrats at 187. I think it becomes crucial to tell that truly the Republicans are the one with a catch-up game, and it's always been like this. The Republicans need to win a very big amount of swing states to be able to win the presidency. Is it impossible? No. Is it easier? Absolutely not, because you have to spend your resources in a lot of places. But with this election, I would say it's actually pretty likely that we see a Mike Pence victory. But before we tell you the whole results, let's just go and filling in by one each of these states. Starting off with our states that are in the likely margins, or anywhere between 5 percentage points to 15 percentage points. So let's start off with the Republicans as we ended up with them. So again, these are the two states I was talking about, Alaska and South Carolina. These states have interesting political dynamics. So in Alaska, we have very liberal conservatives, if that makes sense. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is how it works there. They have liberal Republicans, let's put it like that. And Mike Pence is not near a liberal Republican. He's actually on the way more conservative side of the Republican Party. In a state like Alaska, I think that could really tarnish his support by a couple percentage points. bumping it under the 15% threshold. I think between third-party candidates and if Vice President Harris has a moderate as her running mate, we could see that be kind of an appeal in Alaska. And generally speaking, I would say that in Alaska, we would see the Republican Party come down a little bit from what they have had in the past when it comes to support. In South Carolina, this is a state because of demographics and voter trends that truly are going to show us that the Democrats are doing very well in the South, gaining support. And with someone like Harris on the top of the ticket, Obama-like waves in the South. It's not guaranteed, but it's a possibility that a lot of these black voters are going to be excited, especially black women who are a very big part of the Democratic electorate. These women are going to be very excited to see Harris on the ticket. And that excitement is going to narrow down the margin to probably around 10 points. It's still going to be a handy victory for Mike Pence because at the end of the day, it's a Republican conservative state. However, I think we're going to be able to see some narrow down in margins. Furthermore, let's look at some other states that would probably actually go and do very well for Vice President Mike Pence. I would say states like Iowa and Ohio at this point are going to be in the likely margin for Vice President Mike Pence. So let's think about it. Mike Pence is from Indiana. These are neighboring states. It's in the Midwest. And in these states, something that's very important to have is evangelical support for Republicans. If they're able to drive out evangelical support, they're going to do very, very well. And, I mean, Barack Obama essentially won in here because he was able to appeal to the evangelical communities and to the rural communities. Mike Pence has appealed to both of those groups very, very well. I would say that Mike Pence would perform here better than Donald Trump, although Donald Trump does have his different things of why he won there because, again, it's because of his charisma and his appeal to those voters. But again, with proxying and all the way the campaigns work, I think, anyways, that would be kind of taken care of. But when it comes to ideologies and appealing to them, Mike Pence would do very, very well when it comes to the states of Iowa and Ohio. And for now, those are all the states we have in the likely column. Now going on to the likely column for the Democrats, I would say at this point in time, it's only going to be a couple, and it's not going to be as widespread as a lot of people thought. Because by 2024, a lot of folks thought that, for example, states like Nevada would be likely or over 5% for the Democrats. And that is far from true. However, we do have some states that are heavily solidifying. So let's go through the list. So in Colorado, we have a very interesting dynamic. So we do still have a lot of those rural conservatives and suburbans that are kind of split 50-50. But since we do have the big population center down in Denver, where it heavily votes Democratic, it's one of the most liberal cities in the United States, they're going to end up voting for Harris probably by around over 10 points. That is somewhere similar where we saw Biden win during this election season. In Virginia, I think this is a race that's could be a little bit narrower than people think. Kamala Harris doesn't have that suburban appeal like someone like Joe Biden does. And I think that's something interesting to watch. Or even Hillary Clinton. She's going to have a little bit more trouble at catering to those suburban communities, which at the end of the day, if you think about it, well, is going to be something that she's going to have to figure it out because she's going to need suburban support to win. But her suburban appeal is not the greatest. But Democrats have so much support here that even if she loses 2 to 3% of that suburban vote, she could still win the whole state by over 10%, similar to how Biden did during this presidential election. And last, we have the state of New Hampshire up north. And this is a state that, again, has been trending heavily Democratic. And they still do have some Republican officials. However, it is not in the same place, at least at a presidential level, as it was a couple of years ago, as it was in 2016. Keep in mind, this state swung by over a likely margin towards Joe Biden this election. Remember, this is one of the closest states in 2016. However, Republicans were not able to keep ground there. And especially like someone like Mike Pence that does not appeal that much to that area. Mike Pence's strong suit, if we think about it, is this area right here, the Midwest. Up north, that's a different story. And again, Kamala Harris doesn't have too great appeal there. Because, remember, Kamala Harris is someone that really doesn't have as much appeal to a lot of voters. she has like a little bit of appeal to a lot of different voters. So I think it's something that's going to be interesting to see, but I think she'll win that state by over a margin of 5%. So those are all the likely states at this time. And let's go on to the states that I think would go by lean margins to the Democrats. So by lean margins in 2024, I think we're going to be seeing some states. I would say, most notably, I would say Nevada. We're probably going to Vice President-elect Harris by a margin of a little bit under 5%. So we're probably going to see a margin of 3.5%. Remember, Mike Pence will probably not be able to get the same turnout Donald Trump did. He's probably not going to be able to get the same excitement as Donald Trump did. And when you put it to a state like Nevada, where Hispanic support is hugely necessary, I think it's going to be somewhat difficult. So, for example, I think in a state like Nevada, we're probably going to end up seeing Kamala Harris performing very well. I would say in Minnesota, again, this is a state that has been trending heavily Democratic over the last couple of years. And the Democrats have done a very good job of gaining support in the state. And even with Mike Pence, who appeals to some of the more rural parts of Minnesota, for example, to this congressional district, I forget the number of it, but on the west side of the state, he can appeal to those voters. And for someone like Harris, that's going to bite into her votes. However, I think it's still going to be a little bit less than 5%. He's probably going to prove a little bit of what Donald Trump did. However, it's not going to be enough to flip the state. And at the end of the day, a state like Minnesota is not necessary for the Republican Party to win elections. Now, if you start losing states like Texas and Georgia and Arizona again, well, then you're going to need Minnesota and all the Rust Belt to have at least a chance of winning that election. So that is currently what we have for the lean states. I think when it comes to a lot of states, this is going to be a closer election. At least for the Democrats, it's going to be a tough election for them. As Kamala Harris, I personally feel like, is not a good candidate for them to run, as she doesn't have that appeal to those Midwestern voters, which are going to be crucial. Good, you might be winning in the Bronx, or you might be winning in Denver, you might be winning in LA by 20 points than usual. If you run Harris instead of someone like, for example, Chuck Schumer. I mean, Chuck Schumer's not going to run for president, but it's still not the same thing, though. I mean, it doesn't matter if you win in your strongholds by a lot. At least it's statewide, like California or New York. It matters that you could win in the races that are traditionally close. Because remember, at the end of the day, it's only around 100,000 people that do decide elections in the United States of America. So I think it's something we must analyze. Now, for the Republicans, they're probably going to have a little bit of a nicer election. I think they could win by lean margins in Florida. Again, it's probably going to be a little bit less than Donald Trump did in 2020. However, I mean, Republicans are very popular in Florida right now, especially amongst white Hispanics that live in the state. And same thing in North Carolina. I think Mike Pence could probably appeal to these voters similarly, or if not better than Trump did. A lot of evangelicals. And that presidential look that he offers is really going to help him out in states like that. And I would even go as far as saying that a state like Georgia could pass the 1 point mark and go into the lean margins. So remember, lean margins are from 1 to 5%. And I think the state of Georgia could vote by 1 to 2% for Vice President Mike Pence if he runs against Harris. Because Harris is not the same person as Joe Biden that could appeal to those white, moderate, suburban voters, same way Joe Biden did. And Mike Pence, being more of a traditional Republican, they like him better. They like traditional Republicans better than a Trump Republican. Or not a Trump Republican, because he is a Trump Republican, but rather a Republican with Trump's character. So I think he could easily win in Georgia by a margin of over 2%. Same thing in Texas. And again, it's going to be close. And again, surprise, surprise, the election is going to be decided by the Midwest. But I think in Texas, you're going to see a 3 to 5% margin of victory. Again, it's not going to be as polarizing, I guess, as the Trump-Biden election. However, I think it's something that we must analyze, that Mike Pence is still going to have to face some challenges. Majorly in Texas is that there is an increasing population of college-educated voters, with a lot of these big tech companies moving to Texas from California that, traditionally those voters end up voting Democratic. And second of all, the demographics are changing. Now, the Hispanic vote wasn't changing as quickly and in the direction that the Democrats were hoping for, because if we take a look at 2020 data, Donald Trump did perform extremely well with Southern Texas Mexican Americans. So I think it's something that we definitely must analyze. And in Texas, with someone like Mike Pence, who has somewhat, I guess, somewhat type of appeal to those voters, I think it's going to be something interesting to see, because Mike Pence does not have the same appeal Donald Trump, the universal appeal Donald Trump had to a lot of conservatives. He has it to most of them, but there's a couple that were just really brought in because of how the way he spoke and general things like that. But right now, these would be the states that would fall under a lean margin. Now, when it comes to the 2 congressional districts, let's move now on to the tilt states. I think Pence would carry these two states, or 2 districts. Trump did very well in Maine. He carried that district, and I think Pence could carry it. And in Nebraska, I think he's probably going to end up narrowly carrying it out because it's a conservative district who did not like Trump. With Pence being a little bit different from Trump in the sense that he is more traditional Republican, I think it's a lot more likely that we see a victory from Pence in that district. Now, to the deciding factors of this election, the Rust Belt and Arizona. So, when it comes to this, I could easily see Pence winning narrowly in Pennsylvania. Harris does not have the appeal to the white working class that she must have to win the election. Remember, Biden only won in these states by pretty close margins, less than 1%. And with Harris on the top of the ticket, it's going to be tough for her to keep that support. Especially have someone like Mike Pence who could easily appeal to those voters. In Michigan, I think Harris is narrowly going to pull it out. Because in this state, it's no longer a lot about the white working class. You still do have a lot of voters like that. But the Democrats won here by 2%. And I think it was a pretty decent margin of victory. And truly, I think they're looking at a race where if they can just keep the African American support and lose some of the white working class, they should be fine. And again, with just the state of Pennsylvania and the states we have already called, it is enough for Vice President Mike Pence to win this election. Now, let's take a look at some of the other states that we still need to call. The last 2 states outstanding would be Arizona and Wisconsin. I think that in Arizona, it's going to be a very close race. I think that at the end of the day, I think Mike Pence might end up pulling it out. Because again, he is more traditional. Would I say more moderate than Trump? No, because he's actually more conservative. However, I think he definitely could appeal to a lot of those voters. And Harris, well, she does have some appeal when it comes to the suburban voters. That's not her strong suit. So it's going to be something that's tough for her. And in Wisconsin, this is a tough call. I would say this was the closest Rust Belt state in 2020. And again, Kamala Harris's appeal to that class of voters is not too great. So I would say Kamala Harris would win right there in that or lose to Mike Pence in that state. So overall, this is my final prediction: 294 for Mike Pence to 244 for Kamala Harris. I would pretty much base it on that. Kamala Harris has a little bit of a less appeal to suburban voters and white working class voters, which is really going to hurt her. So, guys, this is it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope to see you guys soon on the channel. Tell me what you guys think of this prediction down below in the comments. And if you guys have any questions or comments, again, leave them down. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And goodbye.